Okay, so now we're at the very initial steps of our cube construction. And one of the things that can always muck things up for us as we go through this process is that we can have a cube that has errors in it, and we build off of those errors before we realize that we can make a correction right now. So what I'm going to do is I am going to deploy this cube just to make sure everything is working correctly. All right. And as you notice, a little bit more of my OCD stuff, I'm trying to get things kind of in a way that I can see everything. So what I need to do at the very top of our cube, remember we're in our cube, not the view. In fact, it might be better if we just simply close out of that view at the top. So here, there is a series of controls that we have here under the cube structure component. The one I want to look at is right here, and it is a process our cube. So let's simply select on this little recycle symbol, and we're going to process our cube. And this could take a little bit of time. We're going to get a series of pop-up messages, and for the majority of them, we're going to select the affirmative. So it says, would you like to build and deploy the project? We're going to say yes. And whatever happens next, of course, we're going to accept the changes and hit yes. Basically, it's going to double check to make sure if we need to overwrite data that might happen to be on the server. And in the cases that there is data, and since we know that we're making changes, we're going to go ahead and overwrite everything. Now, also what we might see at the bottom of our project, we should see some ideas about build structures and also some warnings. All right, so here's the next message. It says that the database already exists. I'm going to go ahead and again and select on yes. Now, you may or may not get that message right away, but let's kind of see how things work out. So the first thing is I can see in the upper left-hand side that I have a green check, right, which is right over here, and it says my deployment was successful, but now it's wanting me to do something else, and I'm just going to simply select on run. Okay, and it's going to check my cube, and I will also see that that process was a success. And so now I'm just going to select on close, close, and then up here in the upper right, or excuse me, upper left, I'm going to select that X, which is in the upper right, and that will close that dialog. And I'm going to save everything, and that tells me that my cube has now been deployed, which means I can do a couple of things with it. But we're not going to get there yet, but I know that from building a cube standpoint that we have been successful at this point in time. By the way, I am noticing this error here at the top, and I'm just going to hit this X over here on the right-hand side, and I'm going to close that out. That's just a minor error dealing with our current situation with SQL Server Analysis Services. Now, one of the things that I want to share with you also is right here at the bottom, right? Notice that we have a couple of non-parent-child dimensions. Database has no time dimension. We need to create some hierarchies again. And that's because these dimensions here inside of our data cube have not been well defined. And so let's do that next. All right. So we're going to make some edits to these dimensions here on the right. In fact, we're only going to do that for machine and product because these actually have hierarchies in it, but the batch doesn't. So let's start with the product. I'm going to double click on the product dimension, and we're going to make some edits here as well. All right. So this little work area gives us some introduction to the product hierarchy. So we know that this is a dimension about the products, but we don't necessarily know how things are supposed to be designed in terms of the hierarchy. So, or at least the software doesn't know, we might know as humans. So we have to basically click and drag these keys over into these hierarchy areas to let the software know how we want to define our hierarchies. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create or establish our hierarchies, by clicking and dragging each of these over from left to right. So we're going to first start with the product type code, click this over here to the hierarchies area, and we get this little box here. The next one we want is the product subtype code, which we'll also click and drag and put it directly underneath the type code. And then the last thing is the product code, which will go last. All right. Now I want to make some edits to this just to kind of tighten up how this is created. All right. The first thing I want to do is I want to adjust the attribute relationships to make sure that they're rigid and not flexible. So the way to do that is we're going to come here to the attribute relationships. And in this dialog, it should already have our hierarchy pictured. And we're going to right click on each of these arrows, go to relationship type, and make them rigid. Again, right click on the other one, relationship type, and rigid. All right. So that makes those attributes or those relationships rigid, and that's going to help us with some errors down the road or prevent some errors down the road. All right. I'm going to hit save all, by the way, just to kind of make sure I have everything in place. I'm going to go back to my dimension structure, and I want to actually add a couple of things. Now, one of the things that will happen if we browse this currently, I'm going to go to the browser and select all. You'll notice that all I see is a bunch of numbers, and this is not that meaningful to me. So what I actually would prefer to see is that I would not only like to see the numbers, but also what is the name that number corresponds to. Now, in our database, we already have, let's say, for example, we're going to look at the product type. We have the product type code, and we have a name that is associated with it. And it would be good that while we look at this hierarchy, that instead of seeing the codes, that we actually see the names instead. All right. So let's go ahead and make some adjustments to our product dimension and the attributes in order to be able to do that. So simply, we want to be able to include the names in the attributes that are available. In order to add those attributes, we click and drag those from the data source view into the attributes pane. So here I'm going to click and drag product type name over here to the attributes pane. Product subtype name, click and drag that over. And the last is the product name. Click and drag that over. Okay. Now what we want to do is make an edit for each of these. So that way when we have actually the product code listed, instead of seeing the product code, we're going to see the product name. And here's how we do that. So on the bottom right-hand side, we're going to be adjusting some of these in the properties area. Okay. Selecting on product code, I have a variety of options here on the bottom right that I can look at. What I want to focus on first is just the issues with the names. So what I want to look at here is in the properties area, I want to look underneath the source component, and I want to look specifically at the name column and the value column. And for product code, and by the way, I know this is product code because it's listed here, and I selected on it over here in the upper left. So on that product code, I want to change the name column to view the product name. And the way that I do that is I select on these little three arrows or dots that are right here, and it will bring up a new dialog. And I'm going to simply select on product name and OK. And notice the change down here. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing with the value column. Product code goes to product name and hit OK. Right. Now I'm going to do that with the subtype code, but this time with subtype code, I'm going to use subtype name, and also for the product type code, I will select on type name, and I'm doing this for both the name column and the value column. Okay. Now, another attribute that we need to, or another property that we need to edit is also this hierarchy visible edit. We want to change this from true to false. So currently I am in the product type code, and I'll change this from true to false. I'm going to select on subtype code, change that from true to false. Now I'll select on product code and change that from true to false. Okay. All right, so the last thing that I need to do is actually rename this hierarchy here. So I am going to select on that hierarchy, and I'm going to go down to the property in basic, and here you can see it says name hierarchy, and I am going to rename this as product hierarchy. Well, all right, and now we can see that name change up here. All right, we'll continue editing the machine dimension in the next video.